Hi everyone, my name is Terry. Welcome to Friday Fact Day, where I get to talk about my work in fitness, feminism, and philosophy. And today's fact is the BMI and why it's crap. So the BMI, or the Body Mass Index, you may have seen it, is usually presented as a chart where you compare your height and your weight, and you cross yourself off on the chart and you find out whether you fit into the category of underweight, normal weight, overweight, or obese. And it's used quite often as a determinant of how healthy you are. And that's why I want to talk about why it's a bad thing today. So to give you a little background, the BMI was created by a Belgian mathematician, not a dietitian, not a doctor, not a health specialist, a mathematician named Adolphe Achille in around 1850. He worked on a few different iterations of it for a few years before that, but it more or less appears around 1850. Being where he was in the time he was, his definition of a normal weight per height was based on white, middle-aged, and middle or upper class men. So I think you can see where there's going to be some problems with this. Fast forward about 100 years into the mid-20th century, the 1950s and 60s, the BMI started becoming really, really popular amongst medical practitioners to be a determinant of health and to start classifying people in these different weight categories and treat their medical issues or whatever accordingly. And that's where things really started to slide downhill. Anybody who is outside of that group in any way is not going to be particularly well served by this chart. And there are modern versions, yes, that do account for things like sex and hormone differences, or they account for race and ethnic differences and things like that. Those are pretty new, and they're still not really the government health standard that the original BMI is. Aside from the cultural or racial issues and the sex and gender issues, there's also a class issue behind the BMI. And it was originally based on upper and middle class men who didn't do hard physical labor. And the same with the women's version that came along. It was based on what, again, white upper or middle class women were doing. They weren't calculating the averages based on women who worked in factories or laundries or were outside farming all day. They were not counted as normal. And that's a big problem because very few very privileged people could live that sort of life. And in the Victorian era, in most of the Western world, there was a fashion, shall we say, for what I like to call the frail and pale look. And the higher class a woman was, the more she was confined to the home, not really permitted exercise, certainly wasn't permitted sport. That was absolutely out of the question. I will also put a link down here for my video on bicycle face and how women accessing exercise via bicycle riding was an absolute turn of events. The idea that women would ever have large quantities of muscle mass was absolutely bizarre to them. They would never have imagined that women would be, lifting weights today. But they also never imagined that the women who were working in laundries and in farms and factories and cotton mills and things were also real women, that they were feminine and ideal. And Keeley and others were looking for ideals. So they really literally did not count. So let me bring us up to the present day. So the problem with BMI being used so much is that it's got a few nasty implications when it's not properly applied and when it's not applied fairly to all people. The medical establishment, quite often doctors use it as an indication of whether or not a person's weight is a healthy weight, which is a very loaded term that I don't like, but that's their language, not mine. It's got implications in certain careers. There's certain jobs out there where if you don't maintain a particular BMI, you can't be active in your job. And again, that gets complicated, especially with people who work out a lot and intentionally pack on a lot of muscle. There's insurance implications quite often. So there's sometimes, not every company, but some insurance companies will reduce or cut your health care benefits if you're not in whatever BMI category they consider appropriate. So with all of these real life implications of the damage BMI can do if it's not well understood, you'd think it would be, thrown out the window by now, but it's still sticking around. And unfortunately, even Health Canada still uses it as a measure of health. I know there's some agnotology fans out there waiting to know where the connection is here. This comes into what we call the lost realm in agnotology. So lost realm is when either intentionally or unintentionally there's a piece of information gets lost in the mists of history. And this is an interesting one because the BMI chart survived, but the original intention of it and the original use of it got lost. And because of that, we're misusing it today, and we're using it as a measure of health when really it's supposed to be a snapshot of the population. So folks, if you have a BMI chart lying around, if it's on your desk, if it's a poster on your wall, take that down, rip it up, throw it in the recycling bin. You don't need it. If it's an app on your phone, get rid of that app. You do not need it, and it's not telling you anything that's of real value to you. All it's doing is telling you your height and weight, and you already know that. So it's not an indication of your health, and it's certainly not an indication of your value as a person, and it's not even a good indication of what category you are in for body weight, and that shouldn't matter anyway. So as I always say, lift heavy, fight the patriarchy. I'll see you next Friday. Bye.